Thank you very much for being here on an evening like this. I hope you're going to enjoy it. We are going to be very optimistic for about a half an hour or so. My name is Mathias Sundin. Before I usually didn't go to work wearing a t-shirt. I used to look like this in my previous work. I had a tie on almost all the time. I was a member of parliament in the Swedish parliament, and there I worked a lot with tech, very broadly. And I started realizing that a lot of people, when they talk about technology, you often end up discussing problems, and of both real and imagined problems, and you spend the majority of time talking about those problems when there's so many opportunities instead. So it felt like this, that this was not just about technology, but the world in itself. That we're standing here looking down into some darkness, and the humanity is ending. You get that feeling a lot, and especially when you talk about technology. And recently, I've heard at a number of occasions about children, small children, 10-year-old teenagers, that their view of the future is very, very pessimistic. They don't even believe, some of them, there is a future. They think humanity will end. So I'm an optimist, but I'm an angry optimist when I think about that. That's not okay, and that's on us. That's how we talk about the world. If our kids think that the world is going to end, that is because of us. I'm an optimist because I look at the facts of the world and I see a lot of things getting better fast. That's why I'm an optimist. And we've also cracked the code how to make things better, how to improve the world. And if we keep doing that, the future is probably very bright. So I took off my tie and put on my t-shirt instead, and co-founded the Warp Institute. And today I'm going to talk about our view of the world and what we're doing at the Warp Institute, and how hopefully you can be a part of that, what we're doing. So, but let me start by asking you a question. If you could be born again, and you can pick any time in history to be born, so from now and back in history, any time you like, but you cannot choose which country, which gender, if it's a rich family or a poor family, some random place on earth at that time you pick. So I'm going to ask you that question. Think about it for 2 seconds. Then I'm going to count to 3, and you just shout out loud and clear your answer, what time you want to be born again. So, okay? 1, 2, 3. I heard today here, some nows, maybe some a few years back. Our answer, my answer, is now, because the world is better now than ever before. Doesn't mean it's perfect now, obviously not perfect, but it's better now than ever before. If you're born at a random place today, you have a better chance than ever before of having a good life in front of you. And let me just mention a few of those things that are going right, that shows that the world is better than ever before. Child mortality. In 1950, it was 22.5%. So almost every 4th child died before the age of 5 globally. 1 out of 4 children died before the age of 5. And you know the saddest story there is in only 6 words: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. That was the case for almost every 4th child just in 1950. But this number, This is the greatest story in just one number. Today it's 3.9%. Still has to go down more, but the decrease has been fantastic. Life expectancy. In 1950, globally, people lived, the average was 46. What do you think it is today? 78? 82? 85? You're too optimistic. It's 72, globally. Children that goes to school, in 1970 it was 72%. What do you think it is today? 90%. 90% today, globally, go to school and finish school. And extreme poverty, in 1990, that's not very far back, in 1990, 38% of all people in the world lived in extreme poverty. What do you think it is today? Less than 10? 15? 50? 20? 7.7%. 7.7%. Every day since 1990, 137,000 people has left extreme poverty. Every day since 1990. That is huge. Democracy. In 1950, about 800 million people lived in democracies. Today, it's over 4 billion people who lives in democracies. So that's just a few of those. I could go on for hours with stats like this. But why is this? Why has this happened? It's because of innovation, different kinds of innovation. And what is innovation? At its core, it's ideas. Behind every innovation, there is an idea. And there's thousands of innovation ideas behind this progress. The idea of democracy, the idea of vaccines, of medicine, of course of education, thousands of those ideas that has led to this amazing progress we've seen over the last few hundred years, and especially the last decades. So let me show you an example of how this works, how ideas work, how they become innovation. This team, Open Bionics, they're a very cool team, and they are making bionic arms, but that's not their best idea. Their best idea is that they share this knowledge, because even though this is a very talented, very, very smart team of people, all of the experts in 3D printing and bionics does not work for this company and never will. No matter how successful they are, most experts will work for another company, live in another part of the world. So they share their knowledge. It's an open source. You can go to their website, download the instructions, and 3D print your own bionic arms. And that's smart in itself, of course, but the real smart thing is that when you do that, you also find people in completely different parts of the world that have ideas how to improve their. There's some expert in 3D printing that says, okay, you can do this a little bit more efficient, that would drive down the cost or make it better in some way, and people upload that, and the bionic arm gets better, just because they realized that you should share ideas with others, and that's how you get innovation. And a good example of that is this girl, Tilly Lockie. She was born as a very healthy little girl, and she was healthy for about a year. Then suddenly, she became very, very ill, and the doctors almost couldn't save her, but they did. But they couldn't save her arms or her hands. So they had to amputate her hands when she was just 15 months old. And of course, if you wanna have bionic arms or other kind of arms for children, that's very expensive because they grow so fast. So you have to change them to other arms all the time, other prosthetic arms or bionic arms. That's very expensive. So, but this family, they realized, okay, we can use the crowd for this. We can use the same open source thinking as Open Bionics. So they started a crowdfunding campaign called Give Tilly a Hand. So they raised a lot of money and came in contact with Open Bionics. And this next video is Tilly trying out her arms for the first time.
Tilly, when you're ready.
Very cool. But this story is not just about Tilly. This is also the story about humanity. Because this is exactly what humanity has done. We started sharing knowledge with each other. When we first arrived here on Earth 2.5 million years ago, we were very, very far down the food chain. We had nothing. We walked around and were afraid pretty much all of the time. But we started inventing things, at first very, very, very slowly. But about 100,000 years ago, suddenly we started doing what Open Bionics are doing today. We started sharing knowledge and sharing ideas. Enough people lived close enough together in a part of Africa so they could share their ideas with other groups. So for the first time, more ideas lived on than died out. So we started accumulating knowledge. And for the first time, humanity really took off. Suddenly, innovation started accelerating for the first time. 100,000 years ago, we had no clothes, we couldn't speak to each other. And from that point, we went to all of this. And 300 years ago, we ended up, of course, just before the Industrial Revolution. And here, we find humanity's best idea ever. And it was not the steam engine. It was the idea that led to the steam engine. It was the idea of human rights, of freedom of expression, the idea of democracy. So we should really call this period in time not the Industrial Revolution, but it was a freedom of thought revolution. It was an ideas revolution. And we should really call this period in time the idea revolution, because that's what it was. That led to the Industrial Revolution, that led to that kind of society that can decrease extreme poverty from 38 to 7% in just a few decades. And this next video is Tilly today. And this is also what happened to humanity.
I'm an actress, I'm a singer, I'm a dancer. When I was little, meningitis nearly killed me. But I fought back, and I won. I have no limits. Every barrier in front of me is there for me to break. Every ceiling is made for me to smash. I do it my way. I'm Tilly, I am Bionic.
This is Tilly with her superhero arms. Open Bionics now produces the hero arm, and children can choose, what kind of superhero they want. But this is not just Tilly. This is also humanity. Everything Tilly said in that video goes for humanity. Earth nearly killed us. But every obstacle is there for us to break. Every ceiling is there for us to smash. Because we have no limits. Because technology gives us superpowers. That is what happened. Tilly gets superpowers from her arms, and we get superpowers from technology. But we need one more thing to make this happen. And that is freedom. Like I mentioned before, what happened before the Industrial Revolution, but we need it today, of course, also. And this man, that's the most powerful man you never heard of. His name was Gene Sharp. He was a very humble man, but he, or his ideas, has toppled more dictatorships than any other person in the world. He started researching non-violent resistance. He started researching how do you go from dictatorship to democracy, which is also the title of his most popular book. He started studying that, and he realized, okay, you might think that violence is the best way to get rid of a dictator, to kill the dictator, to use, the weapons you can find to attack the dictator's military or the police force or things like that. But the part of a dictatorship that is the strongest is, of course, the military and the police, the violence. That's where you find the oppression. That is where they're strongest. So if you challenge them there, you're challenging them where they are strongest. So of course you shouldn't do that. So in this book, he lists 198 different non-violent methods that you can use to be part of toppling and bringing down dictatorship and turning it into democracies. And let me give you one example of that. That is color. I'm sure you heard of several color revolutions. And the idea behind a color as part of a revolutionary movement is that you shouldn't feel alone. You should see other people that's also part of this movement. Because what's lacking most in dictatorship is hope. And you think you're alone and there's no hope out there. But when you see millions of other people wearing something orange, you see that, okay, there's a lot of us. And it's impossible for the dictatorship to stop all and arrest all people just wearing an orange tie or whatever. But you're symbolizing something. That's how you build a movement. That's just one of these. So all the color revolutions comes from the ideas of Gene Sharp. That's how powerful ideas are. And if you add technology to the mix, so you spread them by books, but you can spread them through newer technologies also, these ideas, the more powerful they will get. So the pen is really mightier than the sword is, and Gene Sharp showed that. So we need both technology and freedom at the same time. That's the mix you want for rapid progress. But that doesn't really explain or answer the question why things are getting better. Because there's a lot of bad ideas out there, we know that. Throughout history there's been a ton of bad ideas, and still today there's a ton of bad ideas. But the logical conclusion from that is that because the world is getting better, then in general, not always, but in general, good ideas win over bad ideas. And most likely that will continue, especially if we add technology and freedom together. So that's why we at the Warp Institute thinks that the future is also very good, that we don't stand staring into the abyss, but instead we can feel like this little guy. So there's a ton of things, and I'm going to go through just a few of all the enormously exciting things going on there. We can live longer and healthier lives. We can become a spacefaring civilization. We can create clean energy, clean transport. We can create food for billions of people. And this part of the talk could also be hours long. It's going to be 10 minutes or so. But I'm going to mention a few of those things that's happening. And life expectancy, you've already seen the great progress that the world is making in this regard. But if we look back a little bit to the early 1900s, that's what we died of back then. Tuberculosis, for example, was a big killer back then. If we fast forward to 2010, we don't die of tuberculosis anymore, and we of course live longer. And today we die mostly of heart diseases and cancer. But according to Dr. Habib Frost from the Singularity University, the science now, if we have a normal progress in the science areas with cancer and heart disease, by the 2030s, in 15 or 20 years, they will be much smaller killers than they are today. So we're going to live much longer, 100 and 150 years of a healthy lifespan. And then instead you get, when we live longer, you get some of the brain diseases for Alzheimer's, for example. So we're going to die of those things instead. So it's probably a good idea to start investing much more in those kind of illnesses. A completely different area is self-driving cars. This is from this is a Tesla from the newly released summon function. So if it's raining and you've been to the supermarket and you have a lot of bags with you and you don't want to walk across the parking lot, you can just click your phone and the car comes to you driving by itself. And in in the first 2 or 3 days when they released this, over 500,000 of these summons happened in the US. The EU is dragging behind a little bit, so we don't have it here yet, but in the US they do. And 1.3 million people die in car accidents every year. And self-driving cars will be much safer, so a lot less people are going to die in car accidents, for example. There's a number of other things that will happen with self-driving cars and self-driving vehicles, but that's one of the really big things. A lot less people are going to die and get injured in car accidents. So let's leave Earth for a little bit and go to space. This is one of the visions of how we could live in space. This is called the ONeill cylinder, or an ONeill colony, named after Professor Gerald O'Neill, who proposed them in the 70s. So they're spinning, so you get whatever gravity you want. You can have it like on Earth, or you can just float around a little bit, or a lot, depending on how fast you spin it. And maybe 1 or 2 million people can live in these. They can look like this, for example, on the inside. Or maybe you want mountains, or maybe you want, I don't know, Florence, or what is it? Something like that. And these are much closer to Earth, so this is not months away. It's 1 or 2 days travel away from Earth. But of course, there's a number of other visions to live on the moon, and of course on Mars and other planets. But to be able to do that, we won't be able to send every resources from Earth up into space. That would be too expensive and completely unnecessary, because it's out there. There are tons of resources out there, water and what you need to make fuel, and all kinds of minerals that we have here on Earth, but in abundance. There's almost no limits just in the solar system, and they're out there on the asteroids. But then of course you have to make it much cheaper to explore those asteroids and eventually mine them, and Warp is actually part of a mission like that. Beyond Atlas, it's a Swedish space project, private space project. It's going to do the world's first private mission to an asteroid. So we're part of that and crowdfunding this effort. The first test spacecraft is going up in June next year. This is also a very telling sign of what's happening in the world. This used to be superpowers or nation or billionaires. It's not anymore. All of us can be part of space projects now. Food is, of course, pretty important. This is a burger that looks like a meat burger and tastes kind of like a meat burger, but it's not. It's plants. And you can buy them now at your local supermarket or at Burger King, for example. Plant-based meat with a lot less CO2 emissions, a lot less land use than cattle. So that's one thing, the plant-based. But this is a farm where you can grow actual real meat. You grow it from cells, so it's real meat. It's not plant-based. It's not exactly like meat on a cow, but it hasn't been on a cow. You don't have to kill anyone to eat it. You can grow it instead. Pretty expensive so far, but a lot of money going into this area. Of course, also with a lot of less CO2 emissions and land use. We're going to need food, but we're going to need other kinds of energy as well. Solar, the price of solar has decreased since the 1970s with 99.6%. And in the last 10 years with 80%. It's an amazing progress. So we are going to be able to produce very, very cheap and clean energy. I don't think solar is going to be the one solution, the only solution. We're going to need a number of different solutions in energy, and also there's a huge infrastructure to rebuild, of course. But we have wind, and I also think we need the next generation of nuclear energy, for example. But solar is going to be a big part of this, and prices just keep going down. And that leads us to another part, which is transportation, and not self-driving this time, but electric vehicles. Daimler, who was the company that invented or popularized the internal combustion engine, have now stopped investing in those kind of engines. No investments at all. They're moving all their investments into electric vehicles. And that's happening in every major car company. They're moving to electric. In 10 years, this is my guess, in 10 years, no new cars will be sold that's not electric, or at least not fossil-driven cars, fossil-fueled cars. No new cars in 10 years, that's my guess. So this is just a few examples of all the extremely interesting things that's going on. And when we say at the Warp Institute that we want to make the future come sooner, this is what we mean. We want all these exciting, great things to happen faster. There's no need to wait unnecessarily for them because of whatever reason. And one reason could be that we're very pessimistic about them, or we talk a lot about the problems about them. We should, of course, discuss the problems. But if we focus on the opportunities, these things could happen a little bit faster. So how we go about this and try to help make these things come sooner is, of course, through brains, of course, through brain power. But not just one brain, because that's the key thing. It's thousands of brains, millions of brains. If you connect them in different ways, that's the real brain power. The Wisdom of Crowds, which is also a title of a really, really great book about the number of different ways that the crowd is very, very wise. And we try to live as we learn at the Warp Institute. So this talk that you're listening to right now, it's crowdsourced. So this is not just me sitting down in front of my computer and doing all the slides and thinking about it. There's a number of people that has provided input to this. Warp volunteers, people in our community has provided comments and ideas to this. And also, it's not just crowdsourced, it's also crowd-performed. So I'm not the only one giving this talk. And the idea is to spread this to a lot of you can give this talk, thousands of other people can give this talk. And the thing that will happen then is that every time someone gives a talk, it's going to get a little bit better. So we will have the same message, but of course everyone going to put their spin on it. Someone's going to make the slides look gooder, someone has a better argument for something, or an expert in some area, they provide better expertise in that. So this is the worst Warp talk you're ever going to see. If you watch one tomorrow, it's going to be a little bit better. If you watch one next year, it's going to be a lot better. So our idea is really to spread this message and have thousands of people giving this talk. And the main reason for that is that we want to show people the facts, we want to show all the exciting things going on, so they become more optimistic and of course have more knowledge about the world. And as Hans Rosling showed us, we need to educate ourselves about the state of the world. He realized this with his students at Karolinska. They studied global health, and these are, these kind of students, they have the best grades, you can have. But he realized they didn't believe him when we started talking about what's happening in poor countries across the world. So he did his test with them, the ignorance test he called it. So he posed them 5 questions. They had 2 options for every question. So if you just guess, you would on average get 2.5 correct answers. The students got 1.8. So they weren't guessing. It's not that they didn't know and just guessed. They thought they knew and provided the wrong answers because they thought the world is much worse than it is. He also gave this to the professors at Karolinska, the ones who decides who gets the Nobel Prize in medicine. They got 2.4. And of course, he gave this to the chimpanzees. Exactly. He wrote the different options on bananas, and they randomly picked something. So of course, the chimps got 2.5. And they were very happy about it. I love how all girls move them body. And when you move your body. Yeah, chimps are not very humble winners. But I'm glad for the chimps, but we need to educate ourselves on the state of the world. We at least have to beat the chimps of what we know about the world. So what the Warp Institute is doing is we're looking for all these optimistic stories that are out there, fact-based optimistic stories, and there's a lot of them, but they don't spread that good in media. There's a lot of media writing about them, but if there's some positive news, it doesn't spread very well into media. So far we have a community of about 11,000 people, and we're creating this content, we're sharing it in different social media. The goal is to really get to 1 million optimists. If you get to 1 million optimists, you will have people all around the world. And the community in itself, in the community, there will be a lot of very, very interesting ideas being born there. And all the resources to make these ideas come true will also be in the community. So the big number here is fairly important to get a lot of people in here for all these people to learn the arguments, what's happening in the world, and of course, spread this. And we really want you to be part of this community in different ways. There's a number of different ways. You can choose them all, or you can choose one or two or three of them. One thing is to become a Warp important person, our version of VIP. It's not because you have a lot of money, you're allowed if you do, but you don't have to have a lot of money. This is a membership. You pay $10 a month, and if you are a forward-looking, optimistic person, so of course that money is going to go to the foundation. We're going to use it to create and spread these optimistic news across the world. But also you become part of a very interesting network of people. Really, the most interesting people I think that's out there. So you're going to meet people from across the world. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to probably come up with some really good ideas together with those people. So if you want to have a bigger influence on the world, you should be part of this network. And if, of course, we get to 1 million VIPs, we can do some really big things. And it's the community, the members, that's going to decide, of course, what we should do. Another thing is to give this talk the same basic message, but put your personal spin on it. You're expert in something else than I am. You should talk more about that, or you can make better slides or working PowerPoint presentations or whatever it is. You should provide that and give your Warp talk. It could be for a small setting, it could be for a huge company, it could be online. Whatever you're choosing, the idea here is to get all of your ideas into this and make the Warp Talk better and spread this message. You can also sign up for the free newsletter if you haven't already. So you do it at warpinstitute.org. So you get every Sunday morning, you get a dose of some positive, optimistic, fact-based news, 5 or 10 every Sunday morning. So when you go to work on Monday, get your coffee, you always have something interesting to tell other people that's going to blow their mind because they've read the news and you read this. And of course, please follow Warp Institute on Facebook and Twitter. You're part of this. Share the things we write, and become part of the team here. Become a Warp volunteer and engage yourself in what we do. Find the news, write stuff, write the news items, organize events like this. There's a number of things that we need to do to grow this. Today we are big here in Sweden. We've also started Warp in the United States and growing fast there. But we need to reach the whole globe, of course, to get all kinds of people from all parts of the world into this organization. And that's going to be, I think, really, really powerful. And we talked about that just before. One more argument why this organization and why it's good to surround yourself with optimistic people. My background is in politics. It's not always the most optimistic thing you do, especially when you're in the minority. You complain a lot about what the majority parties are doing. And I just felt, I've been doing this full time now for a year, and I felt, my energy level has increased, and I love being in politics, but just being surrounded by optimistic, forward-looking persons is very good for your health, I think, for your mental health. It feels great. Of course, we discuss problems, but we discuss solutions to problems. That's what we do together. So please join in the way you feel comfortable with, because we can't do this alone. We can only do it together. Thank you.